For anyone who is currently looking for a house to rent, I would like you to take a moment to listen to this story first. The story I'm about to share today is an incident that occurred when the protagonist of the story decided to rent a house. The decision was made to make his daily commute to work easier. However, that very rental house turned out to be the source of a series of eerie and haunting experiences that the protagonist encountered almost immediately after moving in. The story is titled Resident Evil. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. The entire incident. I must take everyone back to the year 2020. At that time, Shin had just graduated with his bachelor's degree and had landed a job with a foreign-owned company. The company was located in the Lat Krabang district, and the job paid him a relatively high salary. However, Shin's family home was in the Bang Ken Lac Si area. The daily commute to and from work spanned about 60 kilometers, which made him decide to look for a rental room or house closer to his workplace. He thought it would be better to save time on travel and use the money he would have spent on commuting to pay for rent instead. At the time, Shin was torn between renting a room or a house. His budget was set at no more than 6,000 baht per month. He began researching rental options on various websites until he came across a house that caught his attention. The house was advertised for rent at 6,500 baht per month, slightly over his budget but still manageable. What made it appealing was that this house was in a residential community, close to the main road, and more importantly, it was very near his workplace. From the details on the website, the house was described as a two-story townhouse. If you drove straight into the community, the house was easy to spot, positioned almost exactly at a three-way intersection. However, the project developers had planted trees in front of the house to mitigate any potential feng shui issues. The entire house was painted gray and had been renovated to appear almost like a new house. The advertisement noted that the house came with only a television, a refrigerator, and some kitchen appliances. There were no sofas, beds, or storage cabinets provided. This didn't bother Shin, though, as he was fine with those limitations. From the front of the house, you could see a gate as the entryway. To the left of the gate was a sliding glass door leading into the house. Upon entering, a staircase was on the right-hand side, with a bathroom located beside it on the ground floor. Beyond the bathroom was the kitchen area. On the second floor, there was a bathroom at the end of the hallway. Facing the front of the house was a large bedroom, and across from it was another smaller bedroom. These details from the website appealed to Shin, so he decided to call the number listed in the ad for more information. A woman with an elderly-sounding voice answered the call. Shin expressed his interest and asked, "Is this house still available for rent?" The woman, who introduced herself as Aunt NID, confirmed that the house was indeed still available. She offered to set up a time for Shin to view the property, and they agreed on Saturday of the same week. When the appointment day arrived, Shin met Aunt NID, the owner of the house. She unlocked the door and let him inside for a tour. The first thing Shin noticed upon entering was a faint but noticeable musty smell lingering in the air. However, Shin didn't think much of it assuming it was simply because the house had been unoccupied for a while, which might explain the unpleasant odor. Shin didn't take long to walk around and explore the house. He quickly grew fond of it and decided to discuss the lease agreement with Aunt NID. Aunt NID told him, "If you're interested, you can move in right away. There's no need for a deposit up front. When the payment is due, just pay me according to the agreement." They then went ahead and signed the rental contract as usual, after which they parted ways. Before leaving, Aunt NID mentioned that she lived in another neighborhood, just about 500 meters away. She told Shin, "If you ever need anything, just give me a call." About a week after that, Shin went out to buy various pieces of furniture for the house. On the day of the move, his parents came along to help him move his belongings into the house. They also helped assemble the new furniture he had purchased. By the time evening rolled around, his parents decided to head back home. After walking them out, Shin returned to clean the floors and tidy up the house. While he was busy cleaning, he noticed a car pulling up to the house next door, one house down from his. The two houses directly beside his, on either side, were empty and unoccupied. The car that parked belonged to Aunt June, the owner of the house next door. She came over to greet Shin, and they exchanged some casual conversation. Aunt June mentioned that she had been living there for over 10 years, with her son and daughter-in-law. During the conversation, she asked Shin, "Did the owner tell you anything about the history of this house?" Shin, surprised, replied, "No, what history are you talking about, Auntie?" At this, Aunt June let out a long sigh before saying, "Oh, the owner didn't tell you anything? Well, the previous owner of that house was my younger brother. I don't know exactly what happened, but he fell from the second floor stairs. When the neighbors found him, they rushed him to the hospital, but in the end he passed away. While he was in a coma at the hospital, a strange, rotten smell would occasionally emanate from this house. After that, the house was left vacant for years. Aunt June didn't elaborate much beyond that. She ended the conversation by asking Shin, "Are you afraid of ghosts?" Shin, with the confidence of a young man, replied, "I'm not afraid of ghosts, Auntie. I don't really believe in those things." Aunt June simply nodded and said, "That's good then. There's nothing to worry about. I've lived here for so long and haven't seen anything. But if something ever does happen, just call me anytime." Even though Shin said he wasn't afraid, Aunt June's story made him feel slightly uneasy. He couldn't help but notice that the house only had a small spirit shrine, but was missing a guardian spirit house, which is typically placed alongside it. Still, Shin didn't perform any rituals or offerings to the spirits, as he wasn't someone who believed in such things. After finishing his chat with Aunt June, Shin went back inside to continue unpacking. While organizing his things on the second floor, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Yet he was alone in the house. That night, however, passed without incident. The following morning, a Sunday, Shin planned to sleep in, but as he lay dozing in bed, he was startled by a faint moaning sound, like someone weak and exhausted, whispering near his ear. Startled, he sat up and opened his eyes. What he saw was a dark figure standing beside his bed. The mysterious figure seemed just as startled by Shin's sudden movement. It bolted out of the room, passing straight through the door. Shin gathered his courage and tried to process what he had just seen. He quickly opened the curtains and turned on all the lights in the room. From that point on, he began noticing strange occurrences in the house. There were unsettling sounds of footsteps going up and down the stairs, sounds that seemed to come from the house next door, even though it was unoccupied. While watching TV downstairs, he would sometimes hear the shower running in the upstairs bathroom. The sound of the water pump activating made it clear that someone was using the water. When Shin went upstairs to check, he found the bathroom door closed. Opening it, he saw that the floor was wet, as if someone had just finished taking a shower. The series of events began to make Shin feel uneasy about living in the house alone. He decided to call his younger brother to come and stay with him, but he chose not to tell his brother about any of the strange incidents. On the very first night, his brother stayed in the house, while the younger sibling was sleeping in another bedroom on the second floor. He heard what sounded like the door creaking open. A sliver of light streamed in through the partially open door. Squinting his eyes, he noticed a shadow peeking into the room. Only half of a face was visible. Thinking it was Shin, he called out, "Hey, shut the door already. What are you coming in for at this hour? I'm trying to sleep here." After saying that, he turned to lie on his other side, not paying much attention. But as soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud slam as the door suddenly closed. Startled, he turned back toward the door, only to freeze in terror. Standing in the doorway was a dark, shadowy figure. The figure's body was completely charred, as though it had been burned in a fire. The head was bald, devoid of even a single strand of hair. The image etched into his memory was the figure's eyes, and a grin that revealed sharp, white teeth, in stark contrast to its pitch-black skin. It looked like a deranged individual gazing intently at its prey. Moments later, the figure's grin widened grotesquely. It moved in a bizarre, unnatural manner, accompanied by chilling laughter. Terrified, the younger brother screamed for help. Shin, hearing the cries from the other room, rushed to open the door. He found his brother curled up in a corner of the room, crying and mumbling incoherently, repeatedly saying, "I'm scared. I don't want to stay here anymore." Shin quickly shook his brother, trying to calm him down and snap him out of it. He decided to take his brother to his own room to let him settle down. Once his younger brother had composed himself, he pleaded with Shin to take him home. Unfortunately, a government-imposed curfew made it impossible to drive him back that night. Shin had no choice but to comfort his brother and convince him to stay. The two ended up sleeping in Shin's room with the lights on until morning. The next day, the younger brother woke up early and asked Shin to help him gather his belongings from the other room. Afterward, they quickly left the house, returning his brother home that very morning. Once his younger brother was back home, he shared the terrifying experience with their parents. Their mother immediately called Shin, saying, "I heard everything from your brother. Have you experienced anything strange yourself, my son?" Shin decided to admit that he had encountered some odd occurrences, though nothing as vivid as what his brother had described. He confessed that he was skeptical, but couldn't fully dismiss what was happening. Their mother suggested he visit a temple and make merit for peace of mind. Taking her advice, Shin went to perform the rituals, hoping to bring closure to the haunting events. After that, Shin never encountered anything as explicit as his brother did. However, strange noises, like faint footsteps or other unsettling sounds, continued to make him feel as though he was never truly alone in the house. At times, he felt the gaze of numerous unseen eyes, watching him from the shadows. One night, as Shin was sound asleep, he suddenly heard voices. The murmurs sounded like people engaged in a conversation, but he couldn't make out the words. The dialogue was a mix of Thai and other unfamiliar languages. One phrase, however, stood out. "It looks delicious, doesn't it?" Half asleep, Shin brushed it off as a dream. But as he remembered that he was alone in the house, he bolted upright in bed. He saw figures around him, men, women, and children. They were tugging at his body, each pulling on different parts. One of them reached out, trying to force his mouth open, while shoving a hand deep into his throat. A chilling voice whispered, "Come on, join us. Will you join us?" Shin felt nauseous, as if he were about to vomit. He jolted awake again, realizing it was a dream within a dream. Yet he found himself actually vomiting, his bed soiled from the ordeal. The areas on his body where he had dreamed of being grabbed now ached and felt sore. Feverish and shaken, Shin called in sick to work that day. After the events of that night, Shin began to fall ill more frequently. His mind was often unfocused, which led to frequent mistakes at work. One day, during a company meeting where management was reviewing the progress of his assigned tasks, Shin became completely unaware of what was happening. Later, his colleagues recounted the incident to him. While the meeting was ongoing, Shin rolled his eyes toward the manager sitting to his right, smiled, and began to laugh. Then he stood up, pointed his finger at the manager, and laughed even louder. Everyone in the meeting room was confused and shocked. They had to work together to pull Shin out of the room. Even after being taken outside, Shin remained dazed and unresponsive. The company president then called Shin's supervisor into a private discussion, assuming that Shin's behavior might have been caused by stress. After the discussion, the president asked the supervisor to check on Shin and find out what was going on. When the supervisor approached Shin, Shin explained, "I wasn't aware of anything. I felt like I blacked out and did all that without realizing it." At this point, Shin decided to share the strange occurrences at his rented house. The supervisor, who had an interest in amulets and spiritual objects, offered to help. He told Shin that he knew a medium who could assist him without charging any fees. Shin agreed immediately. The supervisor then took off the necklace he was wearing, which had a sacred takrut, a type of amulet, and handed it to Shin, saying, "Here, take this. This is a powerful amulet from a renowned temple." The day ended with the supervisor sending Shin home to rest. That night, Shin went home with the amulet. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace and had a good night's sleep. The next morning, he took the opportunity to speak with his supervisor again. The supervisor informed Shin that he had already arranged a meeting with the medium, who suggested that they come that very evening. After work, the supervisor picked Shin up, and together they headed to the medium's house. The medium's house was unremarkable. appearing like any ordinary home. It was not adorned as a shrine or spiritual place. Upon arrival, the medium led them to a room resembling a small shrine or prayer room. He invited them to sit and asked Shin to recount everything he had experienced. When Shin finished, the medium asked an odd question. "Who is Pete? Do you know anyone named Pete?" Shin replied truthfully that he didn't know anyone by that name. The medium persisted, repeating the question. "Who is Pete? Pete came to me and asked for my help. He said he couldn't help you much himself." Shin was confused. He excused himself to message his family. His mother responded, explaining that Pete was the nickname of Shin's late grandfather, who had passed away when Shin was just an infant. Hearing this, the medium began jotting notes on a piece of paper, occasionally asking for names of other family members. Suddenly, the medium looked up and said sternly, "You must not go back to that house. How can you even stay in a place like that? I could sense the stench of death just by looking at it." He explained further, "That house is filled with evil spirits and negative energy. The previous resident practiced black magic and died because of it." The medium instructed Shin to undergo a holy water bathing ritual to cleanse his body of the lingering malevolent energies. He warned Shin, "After the ritual, do not return to that house without me. It's too dangerous." Coincidentally, the next day was a Saturday and Shin had no work. The medium promised to visit the house with him the following day. During the ritual, the medium handed Shin a simple water bowl to hold. He placed a sacred cloth on Shin's head and used a ritual blade to touch various points on Shin's body while chanting incantations. As the chanting intensified, Shin felt increasingly nauseous. Eventually, he couldn't hold it in and vomited into the bowl. The vomit emitted a strong, putrid odor. Afterward, the medium had Shin drink some holy water and sprinkled the rest over his body. The session concluded with a few additional rituals and arrangements for their visit to the house the following day. On the way home, Shin's supervisor dropped him off at his parents' house. During the ride, Shin decided to call Aunt NID, the owner of the rental property. Shin shared the strange events he had experienced in the house. Aunt NID replied in a trembling voice, "I'm so sorry. I didn't think it was still in the house. This happened so long ago." Taking the opportunity, Shin asked her what had happened in the house. Aunt NID revealed the story of her younger brother, Till, who had once lived there. Till had always been fascinated by ghosts and the supernatural. At one point, he became involved in black magic and began performing dark rituals for others. When Aunt NID discovered this, she tried to stop him, but Till dismissed her concerns, saying, "Don't meddle in my business." Over time, Till's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started killing small animals and storing their remains in the house. One day, he fell from the second-floor stairs. Though villagers found him and rushed him to the hospital, he eventually passed away from his injuries. After Aunt NID's younger brother passed away, she began having recurring dreams in which Till appeared, pleading for help. In these dreams, he repeatedly said, "They're coming to take me away. Please help me." Aunt NID, having no knowledge of such matters, didn't know what to do. She eventually decided to consult a fortune teller, as recommended by an acquaintance. The fortune teller agreed to visit the house to investigate. Since Till's death, Aunt NID had not set foot inside the house. She had only locked it up. This revelation helped Shin understand why the house lacked furniture such as cabinets and beds. Till had used the cabinets to store the remains of animals he had killed. Furthermore, the cabinets were filled with occult objects used in black magic rituals. When Aunt NID entered the house to retrieve Till's belongings, she discovered bloody symbols inscribed inside the wardrobe. It seemed that rituals had been conducted there. The sofa, too, reeked of decay, and when it was cut open, the remains of a cat were found stuffed inside. Melted candle wax was scattered all over the furniture, creating an atmosphere that was utterly revolting. The fortune teller, upon seeing the conditions inside, began performing rituals and advised Aunt NID to dispose of all the furniture, ensuring nothing was left in the house. Additionally, the fortune teller recommended a complete renovation of the home. After complying with these instructions, Aunt NID left the house vacant for a long time before deciding to rent it out. Unfortunately, Shin became the first tenant. After hearing this story from Aunt NID, Shin speculated that the original fortune teller may not have been very skilled, as Shin continued to experience strange occurrences in the house. Shin informed Aunt NID that he had arranged for a medium to perform rituals at the house the next day. Aunt NID agreed and asked to be present. The next morning, Shin met the medium at a nearby coffee shop. The medium was accompanied by Shin's supervisor and another disciple. Aunt NID had already gone ahead to the rental house. During the conversation, the medium handed Shin a small wooden box, roughly the size of a bottle cap, and instructed him to keep it on his person at all times while in the house, never letting it out of his possession. When the group arrived at the house, the medium walked around, surveying the property. Frequently, he exclaimed, "How could anyone live here? This place is full of them." He explained that the house was teeming with wandering spirits, spirits of violent deaths, and remnants of malevolent entities. After examining the interior, the medium turned his attention to a small spirit house in front of the property. He clasped his hands together, chanted incantations, and addressed Aunt NID, saying, "This shrine needs to be dismantled. I'll perform the necessary rituals." The medium then took a ceremonial dagger and poked it into various parts of the shrine. Reaching inside, he pulled out a small clay doll. Beneath the doll were 2 foreign coins, which he claimed were likely used in a binding spell. He smashed the doll on the ground, revealing its contents: tufts of hair, old sacred threads, and a burial shroud stuffed inside. The medium collected these items, stating they needed to be taken elsewhere for further rituals and eventual burning to release the spirits. He then requested to survey the house's 2nd floor. Upon reaching it, the medium seemed to be searching for something specific and instructed Shin to thoroughly inspect the upstairs rooms. When the medium entered the bedroom that Till had once occupied, he stopped and stared at the ceiling. After a moment, he asked his disciple to climb up and open the attic hatch. The disciple used a flashlight to peer inside and immediately exclaimed, "Oh my, there's so much stuff up here." The medium shouted back, "Don't touch anything." The attic contained incense sticks, candles, wooden dolls etched with inscriptions, and glass bottles filled with murky yellow liquid. The most unsettling item was a clay pot sealed with a protective cloth inscribed with sacred symbols. However, the pot seal had come loose. The medium climbed up the ladder himself, performed a brief ritual, and retrieved the pot. He explained that these items needed to be taken away for further ceremonies to neutralize their malevolent power. While the medium was conducting the ritual, Shin began hearing a faint noise echoing in his ears. The sound resembled a low, distant scream. However, he didn't mention it to anyone, fearing it might just be his imagination. After the ritual was completed, the medium approached Shin and said, "I've taken all the spirits from this place with me, but this house is truly terrible. If you can move out, you should. Staying here might cost you your life." The medium handed Shin the small wooden box, saying, "Keep this with you for now. Carry it at all times while in this house. Once you've moved everything out, you can return it. But you must bring it back personally." The medium repeated this instruction 2 or 3 times, emphasizing its importance. He added, "Even though the spirits are gone, the location of this house is like a magnet for spirits. Staying here will only drain your life force." After that day, everyone went their separate ways. Shin discussed moving out with Aunt NID, who understood and had no objections. Shin decided to leave behind all the furniture he had bought for the house, taking only his clothes and personal belongings. He moved back to his parents' home and has stayed there ever since. The experience left him too afraid to rent another place. Shin later discovered that during the time he was unwell while living in the rental house, Aunt June had been the one leaving food and medicine at his doorstep. This act of kindness brought them closer, and they became friends. During the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, Shin learned that Aunt June had contracted the virus. He called to check on her and took the opportunity to ask about the current state of the house he had moved out of. Aunt June shared that a few months after Shin moved out, Aunt NID had cleaned and renovated the house. However, the house's eerie aura remained unchanged. Aunt NID eventually put it up for sale, and a married couple purchased it. Aunt June wasn't very familiar with the new owners, but knew that after moving in, the couple frequently argued. Ultimately, the wife left, and shortly afterward, the husband hanged himself in the same room that Shin's younger brother had once occupied, the same room where Shin and the medium had found those sinister items in the attic. To this day, the house remains abandoned, with no one willing to live there. After hearing Shin's story, I personally feel that Aunt NID showed a fair degree of responsibility by disclosing the house's history to Shin. However, if we analyze the events rationally, the happenings in the house could be attributed to its unsettling atmosphere, which may have induced fear in its occupants. Additionally, the contamination left behind by Till's actions could have caused both physical and mental health issues for anyone living there. That said, this is just my personal opinion. What are your thoughts on this story? Feel free to share them in the comments. If your friends are searching for a rental home, make sure to share this story with them. It's possible they might stumble upon a house with a similar dark history. And don't forget to like and follow for more chilling tales. And if you're someone who enjoys spine-tingling experiences or ghost stories, let us be a part of delivering those thrills to you.